Hey, everybody. It's Jeff Myrie and got Kyle Woody here. Also, Allison Breiniger. It's pronounced Breiniger, correct?
Yeah, you did that correct. Yeah, well, that's good.
Um, and I'll let the other fellows introduce themselves.
Got Nick Meisenberg.
Okay. And Patrick Tremert is here as well. Um, our very special guest here today is Allison Breiniger from The Negative Space. Allison runs a company along with her husband, Sean, um, that supports caregivers as well. And I thought it would be a good idea to bring Allison in to talk to us about what she knows about coaching. Um, uh, and so I thought, we could share this with our coaches here and get somebody else's perspective from the outside of what it means to be a coach. Allison, would you be willing to tell us about the negative space?
Absolutely. Yeah, thanks for having me. Yeah, so I'm actually a caregiver for my husband, Sean. He is 44, and he has a rare disease that causes bone marrow failure and also cancer at a rate of around 700 times that of the rest of us. So in the last 12 years, he's had a bone marrow transplant and then multiple cancers. So I've been his caregiver through that whole thing and then realized at one point that there's lots of services out there for him and not much going on for me as his caregiver. And so he and I together founded a nonprofit called The Negative Space, as Jeff said. And that's from like the artistic concept of the negative space. And art is like everything that's in the background that's important to the picture, but that's not really seen and appreciated. But yet, if it was gone, everything would change. And that's what the way I see our role as caregivers, that we're a big part of the picture, but often unseen. So at the negative space, I do one-on-one coaching, which is what we're talking about tonight. I do virtual support groups. I have a podcast called In Sickness. It's a male spousal caregiver and myself. I do social media stuff. And then I also just try to do a lot of speaking gigs to people like medical professionals to really help them see that caregivers need support as well. And I am also in the Twin Cities, like you guys. So I got to meet Kyle a while back, and now I'm so glad Jeff is on the team as well. And the three of us connect well and try to partner as much as we can. So I'm excited to be here. I just want to say too that in before I started this organization, I was in the education field and I was a coach. And I coached coaches on how to be coaches in education. So when I was thinking about tonight, I thought I used to have like a 3-day opportunity workshop to teach people how to be coaches. And Jeff was like, you have 1 hour. So this is just like more of a casual tips kind of situation because so I did coaching back in the day in education and now I'm doing it with caregivers. It's kind of a peer coaching, but it's a little bit more because I have that background. So that's a bit about who I am and what I'm doing. Yeah.
Awesome.
I have a question if nobody else does at the moment for you, Allison. So you say that you're a one-on-one coach. What does that look like?
So I do most of the sessions that I do are virtual, but I do have some people who are local here, and then I meet them at a coffee shop, or if there are persons in the hospital, we take a walk or whatever. Sessions with me are usually an hour. And I always start, and this was something, and you guys, if there are things that you all do differently at Jack's that you want to hop in and say, that's not how we do it here, please just do that because I'm not sure exactly how it works for you all. But one of the first things I do in a session with a new person is just kind of, I want to make sure that right up front, they know I am not a trained social worker. I'm not a therapist. I'm not there to diagnose them. I can't prescribe anything, right? I want to kind of get that out front right at the beginning. And I think that so both so that people kind of know that to kind of cover my own butt, but also I think there's a lot of benefits to that because when you go to a therapist, often the beginning is that they're trying to find a diagnosis. They kind of have to be able to bill insurance. And that's not something I have to do. Right. And so I just sort of say, like, just so you know, like, that's not what I am. What I am is I've coached for a while and I'm a caregiver. Like I am in this with you. And so I get it. Because I can tell them myself that like I just recently fired my own therapist because she just didn't get it. Right. And so there's something really special about being in it like that. And so I tell them that up front. I make sure that they know that this hour, this time that we're together is for them. They get to look however they want it to look. That if they just need to vent, that I am totally objective and they can say the things to me that they can't say to the other people in their life. And I'm not going to judge them in any way. If they want more of like a problem solving or a solution, that we can do that and that we can work on that. If they just want to like talk about, you know, I wouldn't say football to them because I wouldn't be able to go far in that conversation. But if they want to talk about movies or they want to talk about whatever they want that's not related to caregiving, but just in a space where they know that like it's kind of a safe space to be, whatever they want, they get to do that. I make sure that they know upfront that if at any point I'm doing something that doesn't feel like it's meeting their needs, that they can just be like, no, thank you. Like if I start to go into solutions and they're like, actually, I don't want any fixing, I just want to vent, that they can just stop and change directions. So it's really after I sort of set those kind of ground rules, it's just sort of like, hey, what do you want? What are you hoping? What made you reach out to me? What made you decide to do this? What are you hoping for from ever talking to me or specifically today? And then just kind of let them kind of take the lead in what that is. Often people, especially I see some people I see on a regular basis, and they often come with little notes like, here's what I've been thinking about. And I think that's a benefit of conversations like this is like if something really hard happens on a Tuesday and they know they're going to see me on Friday, they have that space. They can know that like on Friday, I'm going to be able to process this thing that just happened to me. And so they can sort of in a healthy way, sort of shelve it away a little bit and then be like, on Friday, we can get to that, right? That they know that there will be a space and time for that. Yeah.
Who do you coach caregivers exclusively?
I do. And I coach caregivers of all kinds. So it's not just spouses, it's not just women, it's not just cancer, it's all types. Certainly, I think the people who are drawn to me are people who are probably, you know, spousal folks, because I think that is kind of a niche thing that isn't talked about enough. And often people find me from my podcast, which is about spousal caregiving. But I've had people who are caring for parents, people who are caring for kids who have a rare disease. So it's any type of caregiver. But I suppose, I mean, if somebody off the street wanted to talk to me, I wouldn't say no. But hasn't happened yet. Yeah.
Hey, Kyle, I'm not sure I know the answer to this question, but can you tell me the genesis of the Jack to Jack coaching program at Jack's? I know that Nick has been a coach for a while, but Patrick rather new to it, and I'm new to the organization, a year old.
Yeah, I mean, myself and Justin Nicolay, when it's just like I want to find a caregiver to help, and I wanted to go fix his stuff and like clean his gutters and stain his deck and do all the things that were done for me. But he was like, I live in a townhome and I don't need any of that. So why don't we just grab a beer at Lucky 13's once a month? And so that's the genesis. It was certainly not framed as coaching. It was, quote, grabbing a beer. But we were both in the deep end at the time. So I think there wasn't a coachee. There was just two coachees trying to help each other out. And so that just grew as more folks came along, into, well, this seems to be helpful. And how do we just connect folks and try to get out of the way as an organization, and walk this delicate balance, which is give some guidance where we have the program agreement that kind of says here's what not to talk about, but what we heard last year in our evaluation was, we as coaches would like to hear more about what to do,
Mhm.
how do we show up in these conversations? And so that's what brings us here today.
And I think it's an interesting thing you bring up, Kyle, because I think, one of the reasons that people want to talk to me or want to talk to your coaches is because, like I said, they want someone who's in it or who has been in it, who gets it. But then it's this interesting thing because, like, if you and I just went and had a beer or coffee together, it would be, if we're, good social, people, we would be like a good 50-50 of like, how are you? Da, 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 da. How are you? And I think a difference in, at least in my coaching sessions, and you can talk about how this works for your organization, is that people just like, they get to take the floor for the hour, and I have one guy who keeps saying, I feel guilty because I keep thinking I should ask you how you are. And I was like, no, this is the one space where you don't have to ask me how I am. And
Yep.
that's okay. And that can feel really good to not have to be like, am I talking too much? Am I taking too much space? Because it's really about them. And they can certainly come, and sometimes they do say like, have you experienced this? Or how has that worked for you? But they don't have to sort of feel like they're keeping up with the social graces of like making sure that they reply to, you know what I mean? Parrot back every conversation. So I think that can be a unique piece of this, that it can be more about them, if they want it to be. But certainly if your guys just want to be like, hey, let's just hang out and make it 50-50, that's fine. But I think that's kind of a benefit of it, is that they can get more of a space than they can in other places of their life, if that makes sense.
I heard you say that you kind of you have a steady schedule with the people that you coach. Have you tried the other way, just kind of like checking in as necessary? And are there advantages or disadvantages to either or both?
Yeah, good question. I think I have both. So I have some people who are like every other week. So when we finish a session, I say, would you like to pick another date? And they say, yep, let's do 2 weeks from right now. And then we just put it on the calendar. And then I have other people who I'll get like an SOS, sort of like, something's happening in my week right now. Do you have any availability for the week? And I always tell them, like, I'm going to be honest about how my life is. And if I can't do it, I can't, but just ask. Right. And so I think the one thing about that approach is that as caregivers, that we too often let it just like stack up until it's to like a boiling point.
Sure.
And so if there's something about that sort of maintenance piece, and often even the people I see regularly come and say like, I don't really have that much to talk about today. But then once they get into it, like those are some of the best conversations, because it's not just the firefighting of like, this is this crazy thing that happened in the last 2 weeks. Instead, those are the conversations where we're able to like dig in a little bit deeper, because we're able to talk not just about like the news, but like, how do I really feel these days? So I leave it up to them, and I try not to pressure people, obviously, but like, as caregivers, the last thing that we're going to do is schedule something for ourselves. And so I think there's something to encouraging them to do it regularly if they feel it helpful, so that they can get that kind of maintenance support,
And do you
because sometimes even if it's not if it's a quiet season, I put that in air quotes for my friends on the phone, a quiet season, like that's sometimes when we can like actually dig into the good stuff, and that's when like I know for me, and for a lot of research has shown that like that's when caregivers actually start to feel their emotions, because when it's not a quiet season, they're just like in survival mode.
right?
So it's when you're in a quiet season that then you're finally like, whoa, what did I just go through? Right. So that might be a time that caregivers might think, well, I don't need to talk to somebody because there's nothing really going on. But that's when like the processing in your body actually starts happening. So that's actually like a really good time to talk to somebody.
Sure. And pardon me if these questions are too invasive, but I'm just
No,
wondering,
no.
what's your coach caseload? Like how many people coach on an average week?
Yeah, it really varies. So it's pretty, I mean, at this moment, I have these 2 regular folks who like are every other Friday, and then a couple other people who are sprinkled in. But then I just never know when somebody else is going to say like, hey, I need to talk to you, you know? And I do struggle a little bit with, I think there's a benefit to me saying, hey, caregivers, make sure you're taking care of yourself. And every once in a while, I do send out a little thing that just says, you don't have to sign up for a session for me, but I'm just saying, like, don't let your things get built up too far, or if there's maintenance, even if you're not talking to me, make sure you're talking to somebody regularly. Just because it's like, I know that if people aren't reaching out, it's not because their life is going awesome. It's because they, are just putting themselves last and not making the time.
Sure. Patrick or Nick, do you have any questions for Allison?
Hey guys, sorry about that. I had to figure out how to unmute myself. No, I don't think so. I'm coaching a few people right now, and I'm trying to balance how often I bug them, how often I reach out versus how much I let them come to me. And I don't know if I've determined a good balance for that. I don't know. What about you guys? Do you guys try to be more proactive with your people, or do you want your people to kind of dictate what they want out of us?
Well, I'm coaching 3 fellas. 2 are across the country, and planning and anticipating the next chat seems to work well for me as a coach, and for the other fellas as well. There's not a lot of texting during the week, and each session is about half an hour for one, and then an hour for the other 2 fellas.
Okay.
And I think the ship has sailed about me saying, I'm not a therapist, and I think they probably know that by now, but I didn't do that disclaimer. And that's something certainly I think we should do, across the board. How about you, Kyle? Is that something that you, when you start a new coaching thing with a Jack, do you talk to them about what you're not?
So I guess I kind of rely on our onboarding with just new folks to the coalition period, and that's usually something we talk about is none of us here are that. And more often than not, that is reassuring to them for some reason. We also say, but we also believe in therapy and we believe in medicine.
Yeah.
We're not saying don't do those things. But yeah, and generally to keep touch, my strategy is what feels like a good tempo, and I offer this, I don't make them do it obviously, but if it's monthly, let's pick the 3rd Monday of the month and let's put it on there, because for me, it's kind of selfish, I guess. It just keeps it on my radar because I live by my calendar. And so I'll check in with them the day before and say, hey, how's tomorrow looking? And, and I try to tell them, like, this isn't an obligation, like you don't owe me your time. This is just a check-in. And so to punt because we've got chemo or surgery is like perfectly awesome. And then if we need to fill it in because we can't wait a month from when we punted, that's also awesome. But it's more of a way that I have self-discipline than it probably is about them. It just, if it's on my calendar and I set it to recurring, and but you could do that and not put it on their calendar. It could just be, oh, I need to check in. And I think, Patrick, I would encourage you to be the guy who checks in, and not necessarily asking for their time, but just be like, hey, you're on my mind, if you ever want to chat. That's a very powerful thing. Like you don't have to have any answers, any questions. Just the fact that you reached out without an agenda it's huge.
Yeah, I think that's a really good approach for the majority of people. I will say the very first guy I coached, he was really upfront and he said, "Hey, I don't like it when people keep asking me how I'm doing and how I am, right? That just brings up, all these bad memories and everything." He told me he preferred if I could just be there when he reached out. And I said, "Yeah, that's absolutely fine."
Yeah.
I just want to make sure I'm not looping everyone into that same category. So I think I really do need to be more proactive with some of my other guys and try to stay more in touch with them.
Yeah,
I think it's all about that caveat of like, you don't have to talk to me.
And I know I'm a little different than a lot of the people in this conversation too, because all my people are widowers and not caretakers. So different conversations, but yeah.
I think
Yeah.
Nick had something, but maybe he's driving in a tunnel or something. Are you there, Nick?
No. Yep, I'm here. I was going to say, just to kind of touch on everything we've all been talking about, I typically start out just like, hey, I'm just a guy, I've been in your shoes, and just kind of try to relate to them on that level. It's not so much like I'm not a professional. Maybe I could be a little more proactive about that. But typically those first couple conversations are a little more structured for me, where I'm really trying to cater to their schedule, lock down, an hour to an hour and a half that I know I'm free and they're free, and kind of get a better idea of their story, what they're going through, and how I can be an asset to them. And all the while just stressing, like, I am not another responsibility or worry to you. I am strictly, like, I'm a crutch for you. I'm here to help you as you need it. And please look at me that way, as opposed to someone you got to call back right away, worry about a text. My only downside to that is sometimes I feel I'm maybe not there for them when they actually need me, because I'm not constantly chiming in their ear or asking for that response. So I kind of like that idea of marking it on the calendar every 3 weeks or whatever on my calendar, just to make sure I check in a more proactive way. But I like hearing that, and even just setting aside official hours. Is that kind of something you guys are all doing in advance to say, let's put 60 minutes on the calendar? Or is it more just, here's a good day and time to call, and we'll go from there?
I'm starting to, it seems to me that building up a rhythm, like Kyle was saying, really, as Allison said, kind of helps people compartmentalize and deals, that I'll be able to talk about that with my coach, or even like at the next Clatch. And I had one of the people I was coaching saying that we didn't need to chat this week because I was going to be at the Clatch. But I think that rhythm and that anticipating is a good thing. It's something that fellas can hang on to. That said, the first person I coached, stopped responding, and I just didn't get that rhythm down. So, has anybody else had a person they were coaching just kind of drift away?
Yep.
Yeah, I have.
Absolutely.
That's why I think it can feel hard to know, like, is it their life? Was this too much? Was it our connection? You know what I mean? Because it is a little more informal, then it's hard to know, it's not like a therapist that you're going to like cut ties with, kind of thing. And so that's why I think making sure that they know along the way, like even when you're doing those check-ins, that to say something like, even if you're not chatting with me, I hope there's somebody else you're finding in your life, or other spaces or places where you can talk about this, or join a Clatch, so that you can at least make sure that even if your connection wasn't working for them, that they're like not just like not getting help anywhere,
Yep.
I think the thing that's so hard is that, like I keep saying, is that caregivers are often not good about putting themselves first and scheduling this. And so it can be hard to know if they're out there and they're needing it and they're just like, I'm too busy, or I'm not worth it, or whatever, or if they were really like, this was not a good fit, you know. And sometimes it can be hard to know which it is, you know. And I think for you guys, probably because you have a whole team, you could say, hey, at any point, if you feel like this wasn't a good fit and you want to be connected with another coach, just let us know. Like, that doesn't hurt anybody's feelings. We got a whole pile of guys, you know, so that they know that like they could still get that support, even if the person they were talking to initially wasn't maybe the right fit.
Yeah. And I think telling both the coach and the coachee, you know, Jeff, as we match them, that's, you know, human chemistry is a very bizarre thing. And the fact that you might not click is not an indictment of either one of you. You know, let's just roll the Rolodex over and, you know, try again.
Yeah.
If that feels promising to them. But yeah, I think more often than not, they'll get busy with other things, but it does leave us coaches kind of, you know, we've heard this from our coaches that's kind of a weird place to be. But I think it's happened the other way too, where maybe the coach got overwhelmed because the season in his life changed, and the coachee was kind of like, oh, I wonder what happened to my coach. And yeah, these things happen. It's natural.
And I wonder for you guys, for your organization, if you could have a neutral person like a Kathy or whoever reach out and just say to the coachee who's kind of floated off and just say, hey, we know that you used to be part of the coaching program. Just wondering if that's something you're still interested in. Should we keep you on that roster or whatever? You know what I mean? Have like a separate person, you know,
Yeah.
reach out and just sort of check in to see, you know, we have other coaches available if that's something you'd like. So, yeah.
Yeah, I think especially there are certain, but there's been a few caregivers over the years that have kind of bounced between multiple coaches and maybe just kind of felt lost. And you know, those are tougher cases to deal with. But it's, to your point, Allison, just checking in, like we're here, and just wondering how you're doing.
Allison, have you ever made the transition with somebody who was a caregiver and then lost somebody and continued to be their coach?
Yes. So that's happened to me with two different people, and one, both of them actually, their spouse they had the same disease that my husband has. So the one, it was a woman and she lost her husband, and then she sort of fell off my radar and just said like she was too worried about me, right? Like she was too worried about me seeing her go through this thing that I will eventually go through. And so she was just like, this has been great. I'm not going to do this to you, even if you think you're fine with it. We can be
Yeah.
friends, but not do this, you know. But there's another guy, in fact, one that I think one or both of you have met, who I think who's been maybe participating in some things, who I coached as a caregiver, and now I'm sort of less officially, but still, like, he'll just call and we'll talk for an hour. So it's less, you know, like, let's get a date on the calendar kind of thing. But still, I think he's reaching out a lot and we're having those conversations, even in this stage that he's in now. So, yeah. Something I wonder about for all of us, I think this is like an open for everybody, is, and I think maybe you had a couple new people join. I don't know if you noticed that.
I did not.
New numbers over there. But
Is anyone other than Patrick and Nick with us? Nope.
Something that I would love to hear everybody's input on is sort of the balance between like how much of your own, because like I said before, like if we were a coffee, it would be like a 50-50, right? But this isn't necessarily that. And so how much of your own story do you share? and how much do you not? Because I
Mhm.
think we all kind of have the tendency as humans to be listening to someone talking, and you try to like make that connection in your brain, and then we want to jump in and be like, well, yeah, that's like this thing that happened to me. But really,
Mhm.
in the coaching world, we try to not make it about ourselves. But at the same time, they came to us because we have that experience. And so I just thought that would be an interesting thing for us to chat about how do we find the balance of sharing,
Mhm.
relating and sharing our own stories and not.
Mhm.
And just wonder what you've all found with that.
Hey guys, I hate to do this to you guys, but I do have to run here tonight. Jeff, can you and I circle the wagons tomorrow or sometime soon and chat about anything I may miss after this?
Absolutely.
All right.
See
Thanks,
you,
guys.
Patrick.
Allison, nice to meet you. Thanks for everything.
Yes, you too. Thanks.
Take care.
Bye.
So
Nick,
to respond to that, Allison, I would say I definitely start out by sharing a little bit about me to kind of try to be vulnerable, to show them it's okay for them to be vulnerable. And then from there, it's more just, it depends on what they ask of me. But in
Mhm.
your view, you feel it's more important to not share so much, to really keep the coach's hat on and not be just like another guy or gal who's been there. And I guess I haven't thought about it that deeply, other than I want to try to connect with this person and be there for them. Yeah, I guess that's
Yeah.
what I got.
Yeah.
That's my
And
question.
I think it, sure. And I think it can go either way, right? Because this is more of like an informal coaching thing. I think what we need to be careful of is, like I said, as humans, we have that tendency to just always be like listening, not to in real listening, but instead listening in preparation to respond, right? So where our brains are just always trying to think of like, what story do I know that I can respond with? And so if it's something that really would help this person to hear that, like, oh yeah, in my life that happened too. But I think often in regular conversations, when we just sort of spit back a story of our own, that like derails the conversation away from what the person was really talking about. And so I think we just have to think about, is our story going to be a benefit to them and add, or is it just like something that we feel like we need or want to share? And to ask ourselves that before we contribute in that way, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that does.
That's a brilliant piece. I feel like uh, sometimes my experience was years and years ago, and years of grieving behind me, and so I need to perhaps take a closer look at checking myself the next yarn that I spin or the story that I tell. Uh, there is one fellow that I'm coaching who is really hungry for um, learning about my experiences and to see if they relate to him.
Yeah.
Okay, you're X amount down the road. Does it get better? That's one of the big
Mhm.
things. And I guess I share stories that are examples of how things get better. But it's important to check ourselves as coaches.
Yeah. Well, I think what you said is exactly right. If he's hungry for it, if he's saying like, Jeff, tell me, like, you're my future, you're my crystal ball, man, like, what's it going to be like? That's different than him saying this really hard thing happened to me today. And you be like, you know what? That reminds me of this time. This really
Yeah.
hard thing happened to me. Right. And he's like, what? That was not what we're here for. You know what I mean? So I think
Right.
it's that can be the difference. Right. Yeah.
Trick I've had some where it felt successful to me was just writing down every word or every highlight that comes out of their mouth and trying to then, and this is easier when you have someone who's got a lot to share. And then just sort of watching my notes and listening and trying to connect dots and tweaks. I guess it's a benefit of having a poor memory. I can't keep it all in here. So, and then for me being visual, I think I can connect dots better when I'm seeing the story kind of on the page in front of me. so that helps me know, okay, if I'm going to weigh in, it might be because I'm connecting some dots, or I found a blind spot that they don't have access to, versus just sharing that I can relate, or that, and not to diminish the power of relating, but that's been helpful. And I also have it, it gives me, if I have some kind of framework that I'm working within to try to understand, like, what is the needle I'm trying to move here with this guy? And sometimes it's kind of an in the moment kind of decision that I make. Other times so two frameworks I've used. One is, how supported do you feel in your role? And just 0 to 10. And sometimes, you hear 2. And it's like, all right, what if we could get you to like an 8? And, try to articulate this gap that we're trying to close together. And then, just keep coming back to that. Like, is this moving that needle? Or that thing that you tried last time we talked, did that move the needle? So that is helpful for me, because I like being productive, I guess. And not everyone is after that, though. Some people are they don't want to be boxed in, or feel like maybe that feels too much like therapy. But another framework is just sort of 3 steps. And like Allison, I've had a long time to think about this, and I do this not every day, but I've done it for a long time. And that framework is just kind of 3 steps. One is and number one, because I don't want to forget this, is make them like celebrate all the shit they've been through and all the stuff they continue to go through, and not just survive, but some days thrive. And stop, for too many years I just was beating the living shit out of myself because I wasn't doing it right, and just trying to get them to let go of that, and just celebrate. So that's the number one thing I tell myself. Just, I want them to walk away from this conversation just feeling proud, like, wow, look what I did. The second thing being, how can we find margin in your life? And the third being, fill that margin with self-care or joy. And so usually what that does is, how do we find margin is I think a different way to say, who can we ask for help? But for guys, it sounds a little less asking for helpy.
Yeah.
And so that framework, celebrate, find margin, fill the margin, is kind of a just a structure that I use to. Now it's never linear like that, right? Like,
Right,
you're
right.
bouncing all over the place. You go from 1 to 3 to 2 to, but I need simple frameworks that, because, we at one point were talking about, well, we want these guys to take better care of themselves. Let's get them gym memberships. Let's talk to the Y, and they'll donate these memberships, and then they'll go, burn off some frustration, and be fit, and yada yada. But what we realize is that isn't the problem. Most of these guys have gym memberships. They just don't have the time.
Yeah.
So finding a way to challenge them that, getting that help with your loved one is not, like, it's your responsibility to an extent to either care for yourself or find people that will care, a community that will care for you. But I'm getting off track, but I just wanted to offer those 2 kind of frameworks that have worked for me, and I don't necessarily go in sort of pre-decided which one I'm going to use, or it's a little bit of a maybe the biggest guiding principle is what is what is the energy this person's coming in here with, and how can I just make them feel heard and like reflect back to them a lot, like what I just heard you say, is a very powerful thing, um, that I think I read in a kid's parenting book somewhere. Like,
Mhm.
and it's oftentimes, a place where you can kind of course correct, like, oh, I didn't actually understand that right, or you didn't articulate it the way you thought you did. Um, so
Yeah. I think what you said, Kyle, at the end there is so powerful about like it's about giving them a space where they feel heard, right? So I think it's good for coaches to have strategies like what you just said in their pocket, because there might be someone who's just like, I don't know, I'm here. My wife made me come. I don't know, and you're like, "Ugh, where do I even begin?" Right? But I think that we want to be careful that there might be somebody who just wants to sit there and for like the 60 minutes or however long, just be like, and then this happened, and then this happened, and then I felt like this. And like they're not going to fit in the framework.
yeah,
And so to realize that like it's not, I'm a productivity lover as well, and I'm trying to be less so in my life. And so I'll say that it's not always about in these spaces, even like the moving of the needle might just be that their shoulders are like a half inch lower than they were when they walked in the room with you or got on the Zoom with you, because they're like, whew, I got to say all those things, or someone heard me, or I had this space for this. And so um, some people really like the like, okay, we did this and we did this and we accomplished this. And some people are like, I just want to talk to someone who is not my family about how hard this is. You know what I mean? And I think that also ties in with the fact that sometimes in these sessions, like, and with some people that I coach, I say very little. Like they just want to talk, and I actually just can just sit back and nod. hmm 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 And sometimes I think, am I doing my job? And I think, yeah, actually, this is like probably the best job I can do, because they just want that. And so I think just the like sitting back, this strategy that I used a long time ago, I used to buy all my coaches water bottles, because it's like, especially if it's when you ask a question and there's kind of like an awkward silence, or you're trying to keep yourself from like jumping in, that I always have like a beverage nearby. Because if you're taking a sip of your water or whatever it is, like it doesn't feel weird that you ask them a question and now there's silence. It kind of like it gives some space. Makes the silence okay. It makes you kind of shut up a little bit. Plus it calms you down if you're feeling stressed. And so like to always have some sort of like beverage with you, because that can just really help slow you down and make sure that the other person is talking, because really this is their space and they get to make it whatever they want. And then you can sort of jump in and facilitate as you need to. Um, but it's theirs. It's their hour.
is there ever a place or a moment when you're like, I need to I need to take a different approach and like kind of snap this person out of a trance that they're in, or yet
Mm-hmm.
be a little more confrontational and like, hey, this is coming from a place of love, but you know,
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Because I think we want to be that safe space, but also sometimes then they can just like dig on down into a trench, right? And we've got to find the balance of like, okay, we gotta let them speak their truth, right? But then also sometimes be like, and also it's gonna this let's do, let's help them to kind of dig their way out a little bit. And so I think you're right. You're always sort of watching for that, like sometimes we do need to kind of come in and like scoop them out and not just let them keep going, if that makes sense. I think
yeah.
one thing, I'm just watching the clock, and so I want to make sure for sure that I get to say this one thing, is that like big old pet peeve of mine is bright siding. And that is essentially like when you start any sentence with like the words like at least, right? And so again, I think in conversations as humans, we tend to do that a lot because we hear someone and they're saying something to us and it feels really uncomfortable and it makes us feel uncomfortable. And so we like to bright side and say like, well, at least your person doesn't have this. Well, at least it's only surgery, at least. And like anything that when anytime we like bright side someone, it just like squashes them down. It like diminishes like like the power of what they just said to you. So they spoke their truth and you were just like, squash, doesn't matter. Not as bad as you thought it was. So I think it's an important thing. Like if coaches could have like a post-it note next to their computer that said like one thing, it would be like at least with like an X through it or something. Because I think in any context in our lives, like we need to take those words out of our mouths because it's not our place to like tell someone it could be better, right? Like they get to do that if they want to, they can say at least. But we, especially as people who are supposed to be like their safe person, want to make sure that we aren't bright siding them.
Amen. The toxic positive.
Yes, exactly. Yep.
I found that the hardest, so sometimes I get the really tough calls. I don't know. I guess I became a pastor and was unaware. But when I have definitely made that mistake, Allison, like, because I just was like devastated and shell shocked by the news. And it's this human reaction to be like, well, I want to make that smaller.
Yeah.
Because it's
Right.
uncomfortable for me, it's uncomfortable for them. And how can I diminish it? And it's not because I want them to feel diminished. It's just
Right.
hard, like we just got the news that this is not operable and she's going to die. Like it's just a matter of like a few weeks or months, like not. And here you are hearing that, and the thing that is so hard is to just say that's awful.
Yeah.
I'm so sorry.
Yeah.
And shut up. Like,
Yes.
you just sit in the puddle with them.
Yes.
And because I promise you, if you're like me, any words that come out of your mouth are not gonna
Right.
help. They're just not. Like one of my mentors said to me, it strikes me that your work is spiritual. And I'm like, what do you mean by that? We're not affiliated with the religion.
Right.
We don't,
Right.
we're all people are welcome here. And he
Very true.
just said, well, you're dealing with problems that humans cannot solve. And so when I think about it that way, it's like, yeah,
Yep.
we are. And so I think that feels good when I know like Mayo couldn't fix this, Cleveland Clinic, Dana-Farber, they've all tried. And so my job in this conversation is not to fix this. And it isn't even to make this person feel better because it isn't possible. But I can be witness to their suffering.
Yeah.
And I can,
Yep.
and that's a moment they'll remember forever. And
It
so
is.
will you.
Yep.
It's a huge privilege but it's hard and it's not for everyone. Like I remember I got one of those calls walking out the door with my boys to go trick-or-treating, like in 2018. And it ruined I just was like, luckily I had a mask on and I was Darth Vader and one could tell that I was a hot mess the whole
Yeah.
time. But I hope for our coaches that they don't have to go through that. But chances are eventually that's going to happen.
Yeah. And I think so, I mean, so beautifully said, Kyle. And I think to say, like you said, that's awful. I'm sorry. And then shut up and sit in the puddle with them is what you said. And it's like, yep, exactly. And I just think the honor it is that person, those people have chosen you to call and tell this news to. Like you're not there like, Mom, they didn't have to call you to tell you the news, but they chose to call and tell you that news is really an honor. And so to say those couple things, this is awful, I'm sorry, and shut up and sit in that puddle with them is like, it's what you do, right? And you say that's not going to help, but it is going to, I mean, it's not going to fix it, but having you sit in that puddle with them is going to make it better. I mean, as better as it can be, Yeah.
How do you I've started to echo an optimistic take on something. So I hear somebody talk about, well, this whole thing was planned, so things are going according to plan.
Mhm.
Do you think as a coach it's cool to talk about that as a takeaway? Not assign that to them, but reiterate that.
Mhm. Yeah, I think it's good at the end of and again, you guys can decide. I mean, if you're sitting at, what did you say, where you go, Lucky 13s, drinking a beer, it might feel weird to be like, what are your takeaways from our time together,
Mhm.
right? So you get to kind of decide like how that feels and what kind of vibe you have going in.
Sure.
But I think for any of our brains, like we're all in our stress brain as caregivers, and we're not thinking clearly. And so I think that anytime we can say, like, so a couple things we talked about today were ba-bum, ba-bum, ba-bum. Is there anything else that I forgot that was important to you in this conversation that you want to make sure you remember? Or, anything that sort of reviews it, or like just to sort of, because sometimes you talked about something amazing and brilliant on minute 5, but by minute 59, they have forgotten, right? Because their brain is full. And so I think it can help to sometimes say, if you feel like that's the right vibe that you're in. Or like I heard you say that you're going to look for like 10 minutes in your day that you're going to try to go outside. Like, is anything I can do to help you make that happen? Like that kind of thing, to sort of like tie it up a little bit at the end to review what happened and kind of like set them up for the next time. But again, sometimes they just might sit there and cry for you with you or whatever for 60 minutes, and that's fine too. But if it was more of like a tasky, solution oriented conversation, especially, I think it's good to be like, so you said you wanted to do this thing. How can I help you try to meet that? You want me to check in with you? You want me to text you in a week and ask you how that's going? You want me to send you a timer? Like, how can I help with that?
I think that's a great way to end this meeting. Is
Yeah.
what were our takeaways, or what were
Takeaways.
our, the things that stood out for us. But before we do that, I also want to say I've asked, I'm not consistent, but I would love to be the coach who also is witness to your wins. And
Mhm.
I don't, like, I will just be the guy who's there when we're getting our asses kicked, and but I also love hearing, like, man, the scans are clear, like, let's share that too.
Yeah.
If it's not with me, share it with someone
Yeah.
else.
Yeah.
That's I don't know why. I think sometimes, at least my own brain does this. I diminish that. I'm moving
Yeah.
on to the next thing. I'm
Yeah.
not in a mood
Yeah.
to celebrate that. But yeah, so
That's
I
huge.
would be witness to your wins.
Yeah. And one last thing I want to say real quick is just about boundaries. And you guys, I don't know what your rules are around this, but for some people, they could quickly escalate into like, I'm texting Jeff all the time. Jeff's my new best friend. I'm telling Jeff all the hard things, right? And so I think for either you individually or you as a program, to think about like, okay, how do you establish that? And is it a certain phone number? Is it a certain, do you set it up to be like, hey, I'll text you, but you know what I mean? Just because that can quickly escalate into like not, breaking over into other boundaries. So it's just something for you all to think about that maybe you already have things in place for. But.
I don't think we do.
Okay.
But I mean,
Okay.
we did set up separate phone numbers for Jeff and I, but for our coaches, the organization doesn't provide any, buffer or like, and I don't know that we've ever had that concern, or at least communicated to us. I'm sure it has probably happened. But that's a good thing for us to think about, is how could we help our coaches not get overextended.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Well, thank you, Nick, for picking it up with us and being part of the conversation. Allison will be joining us weekly for the rest of 2024.
Here's their cell number, you can text her.
Thank you so much, Allison.
Sure. No, it was great. Great to
We
talk to you.
appreciate it. And thank you, Kyle, for helping this. I believe this was Kyle's brainchild to bring the outside.
No, No, it was the coaches. We brought them together last year and, we just wanted to hear from them. And one of the things that, who does this all the time and, can help us do it better. And so that was us just listening to the people that we're trying to help so they can help people.
Yeah.
Nick is one of our longtime OG coaches. He's been
Nice.
around since what, 2017, 2018? Yeah.
Yep.
Nice.
So
Oh yeah,
thank you.
no, actually it is 17. You're right. Sorry. Not. No, thank you to all of you. This is really insightful. And while I've been a coach for a while, I'm just a guy. So I picked up a couple things from tonight's conversation and very much appreciated it. I'm glad to be included. So thank you.
Thank you, Nick.
All right.
Thank you, Allison. And Jeff,
Yeah,
thank
sure.
you
Thanks.
for making this
Yeah.
happen.
All right. Everybody have a good night.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Take care.
Bye.
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 Bye.